All right, we are into November now, and these are when the games start to matter in college football. All of it up until this point has just been preamble. And let's get to the big games going on in the Big Ten. Eric Rogers joins me right now as we go over the scores and the highlights in the Big Ten Conference from this past week. And we got to start, of course, with the Penn State-Michigan State game. Huge game, which, by the way, the result of it, probably not favorable for Bucky.
Yeah, I mean, when Michigan State beats Penn State, I mean, a close game. I mean, we're looking at scores of 27-24. Ohio State obviously losing to Iowa 55-24, 31-24 records over Maryland. And then Wisconsin 45-17. We'll get into that a little bit. But, Matt Coughlin, the kicker for Michigan State, hits that 34-yarder to win the game, the last play of the game. And, that also they had that lightning delay, so a 7-hour plus delay in the game, or just total time in the game. Like, that was a game where, Penn State had control early, and then you have that lightning delay, and then Michigan State comes alive.
Yeah, it turns out to be almost like a 5-hour second quarter, I mean, it's absolutely nuts. What it does, though, it gives Penn State 2 losses, Ohio State 2 losses. You would have thought that somewhere along the line the Badgers would have played one of those teams in the Big Ten championship game. Now it might even be Michigan State.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it looks harder and harder now to find a path for the Badgers to get to that playoff spot in one of those coveted 4.
As much as a lot of Badger fans hate Ohio State and hearing about 5-star recruits win games and the rankings and everything like that, you still want those teams to win, because then when you face them in the Big Ten championship game, you're looking at quality wins to help catapult you in, where now this sets up a situation where Wisconsin, even if they win out the rest of the year, they still might not make the college football playoff field.
Yeah, and even next week they play Iowa. Iowa with that huge win. You talk about a 55-24 in that one. The most amazing thing I think that comes out of that game, though, is one, Iowa wasn't even ranked, and they just roll over Ohio State like that. Second thing is Ohio State, even with the loss, now they're going to host Michigan State next week in the Big House. If Ohio State wins that game, or whoever wins that game, probably wins the Big Ten East.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at that as a situation. Now you have all these teams at 7-2, and JT Barrett didn't look like his typical self in that game.
Not at all.
4 interceptions, and Nate Stanley over on the Iowa side, 20 of 31, 226 yards and 5 touchdowns. So great quarterback play from Iowa, even though some of those touchdowns were just short little passes off to the tight end, but getting it done for Iowa and surprising a lot of people along the way.
Yeah, we end up looking at the other side of the conference then over in the Big Ten West. Run down the scoreboard, if you will.
Yeah, so again, we talked about Wisconsin. Northwestern beating Nebraska 31-24. That's a big decision maker there in that game. Illinois falling to Purdue 29-10, 33-10. Michigan over Minnesota, which is another one of those games where now Michigan will eventually face Wisconsin here.
The only fun thing about that Michigan-Minnesota game, I love the little brown jug.
Yeah.
One of the better trophies that you're going to find. Purdue at 5-5, maybe a bit of a surprise there, as Coach Braum has them going. Nebraska might be on the outside looking in when it comes to a bowl game at this point. They're going to face Minnesota next week up in Minnesota. If Nebraska loses that game, they're probably out and won't be bowl eligible.
Yeah, just a big wacky week in the Big Ten. We're kind of going to go through some of these games, and I don't know if you want to let's just go into Wisconsin, Indiana. You look at that game. Alec Ingold, who would have thought your fullback is your leading touchdown scorer? 3 total touchdowns in that game. The Badgers outrushed the Hoosiers, get this, 237 yards to 40.
Yeah.
So, ground game is alive and well in Wisconsin if you didn't already know.
Final score looks big, but in that game, in the fourth quarter, after Indiana had a 10-0 lead in that game, Badgers bounced back. But in the fourth quarter, Indiana's only down 1 score, and they have the football, and they had just scored on the previous drive. Then you get a couple interceptions by who else? Barry Alvarez's grandson.
Yeah. Joe Ferguson getting it done. The other thing that I think to take away from this game looking forward is Quintez Cephas injury, Dakota Dixon, Chris Orr all left with leg injuries. So, Wisconsin gets the win, and it looks impressive on the scoreboard when you see the stats. But you got to stay healthy if you're going to continue to win these games. And you talk about next man up mentality, but it only goes so far. I mean, how many times have we seen that with Wisconsin? You lose a guy early in the year. It was Jack Sitchie this year, and now it's seemingly set up to a 9-0 Wisconsin team. But can you keep that up?
Yeah, and they're going to have to. I mean, the Badgers now, next 2 games are at home against Iowa, against Michigan. Hopefully, both of those teams are going to be ranked when they end up playing both of them. I'm guessing Iowa's going to get ranked. I think Michigan will be ranked after they beat Maryland. Then they finish up for the battle for Paul Bunyan's axe at Minnesota. Badgers got to win all 3. I think at this point, they got to hope in the game with Michigan State and Ohio State that's coming up on Saturday that Ohio State wins that game.
Yeah, and the other thing, I mean, I'm just looking ahead to college football playoff projections, and Bleacher Report has Wisconsin, on the outside looking in. They're going to be in the Orange Bowl against Clemson if all things kind of stand for by Bleacher Report standards. So it's kind of like, I mean, what the hell more do you want Wisconsin to do?
It's almost hard to believe that Wisconsin can go 12-0, win the Big Ten championship game, and still not make the 4-team college football playoff. That's kind of what we're staring down the barrel
That's
at,
sad.
though.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, so wacky week in the Big Ten. The Big Ten Conference might be locked out. Things will change, though, quickly. We'll talk more about the Big Ten Conference next week, right here on the Sports News.